Hello. I have for you the third round of the Martin Laine Memorial held at the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg, Mass. Last Wednesday. And I had the white pieces on board 1 against Bruce Felton, rated 1905. I led with d4. He played knight f6. This is a really flexible first move because it can lead to a whole bunch of different defenses for black. You can get a King's Indian with g6 and bishop g7 and castle kingside. You can get a Grunfeld, which is g6 and then d5. You can get a Benoni with c5 and then e6. You can get a Nimzo Indian with e6 and bishop b4 after c4 and knight c3 from white. I played c4, and he played d6. This move is consistent, I think, only with the King's Indian defense, or some other defense very similar to it. I played knight c3, and Bruce played knight b to d7. I had never faced this before, so I made things up as I went along, but I decided that I didn't really want to play e4, because after black's e5 and my natural d5, as in the King's Indian defense, I thought that black would be able to play knight to c5, threatening the e4 pawn, and then once I defended it, a5 to maintain the c5 outpost. And I thought, well, that's just it looks like a path toward a kind of an easy King's Indian position for black. And I figured it's probably what Bruce wanted coming out of this opening. So I elected instead to play knight f3, and after his e5, to play e3. It's less ambitious, but it reinforces the d4 pawn, which prevents black's knight from using the c5 and e5 squares after a capture on d4. Bruce played bishop to e7, and that makes it clear that we're not going into a King's Indian, which would have to involve g6 and bishop g7. I played bishop to e2, and here he played c6, which I think is a nice move. Black wants to create a nice big pawn center by playing e4 and then d5. And that would cause transposition into what I guess we can call a French defense advance variation with reversed colors. I castled kingside, and Bruce played h6. And I'm not really sure what the purpose of this move was, but it wasn't a terrible move. I think black probably instead should have gone for the e4 and d5 idea. And after his h6, I played queen to c2, stopping that e4 idea, which previously forced the knight on f3 to move away, which gave black time to play d5. But with the queen on c2, there are now two pieces guarding the e4 square, which means e4 can't be played. And Bruce played g5. I think black definitely should have castled kingside here. It's, to me, clearly the best move. g5, on the other hand, respectfully, I think is a major mistake for black. Black appears to be launching a kingside attack, but is doing so in a situation in which all signs point to that attack being inappropriate. The center is undecided, it's not locked. Black does not have a pawn on the e4 square, which might help with a kingside attack. White has not moved any of his kingside pawns, which would give black targets, and black's pieces largely are not on that side of the board. I played rook to d1. The natural response to someone making an attack on one of the flanks is to open up the center and put your pieces there. So I was intending d takes e5 at some point. Bruce played queen to c7, reinforcing e5 and getting his queen off of the d file. And we can kind of see the other major problem with the move g5 now, which is that the black king doesn't have an obvious place to go to be safe. Having said that, I think black should still castle kingside. And that's maybe not in this position because queen c7 was a good move, but possibly on the next. And that's because even though the black king is much less safe over there than it would be if the g-pawn were still on g7, it's still less safe sitting on e8. I played b3, And now maybe was a time for black to try the move d5, trying to get closer to equality by taking some more space in the center. And the idea is that after c takes d5, white can't immediately play knight b5 because the queen on c2 would hang. So I'd have to play bishop to b2, rook a to c1, then probably move the queen somewhere, at which point I'd be threatening knight b5. But that's quite a few moves. Instead, Bruce played a6. I played bishop to b2. Bruce played knight to f8. Again here, this is probably a time when black should be castling kingside. The white pieces are almost entirely developed, and white remains able to open the center. So if the black king doesn't get out of there soon, he's going to be in big trouble. But Bruce played knight f8, an idea which is half of the path toward getting the knight to a square over on the king side, like g6 or e6. But with the center able to be opened, undeveloping a knight like that tends to not be a good idea. I played d takes e5, Bruce played d takes e5, and I played knight e4. And this superficially looks like it walks into a nasty pin, but if black plays bishop to f5, white plays knight takes f6 with check, and after bishop takes f6, grabs the bishop on f5. So Bruce instead played knight g6, as the move knight to e4 threatened to grab the pawn on e5. And here I thought for a while and had a couple of major options. One was rook a to c1, just bringing the last piece into the game and saying, well, it's clear that white has an advantage here. I haven't yet figured out what to do with it, but I know I'm better, and I know black's going to have a hard time finding safety for his king, and kind of continuing from there. But there was another option which I found very attractive, and that was to play the move c5. And after doing a little bit of calculation, it looked like c5 was just hanging the c5 pawn, because after knight takes e4, which removes one of the defenders of c5, white has to recapture with the queen, which removes the other defender, and black can play bishop takes c5. But had that happened, I was planning on playing knight takes e5, because that pawn is now inadequately defended. And I was really hoping for this variation in the game because there are some very attractive tactics here. I'll give you a couple of examples. Well, actually, I should say first that it's possible I miscalculated this and that there's some line in which some combination of captures on e5 and the playing of the move f5 makes black okay. But my strategic reasoning was that removing the e5 pawn with all of my pawns being active was very bad for the black king. Okay, so on to the attractive variations. If black had played knight takes e5, I intended bishop takes e5 with a fork of the rook on h8 and the queen on c7. But this is not the attractive part. I thought black might respond with queen e7, and at first didn't see a way for white to continue here. I can't play bishop takes h8 because of queen takes e4. But this position, I realized eventually, is one in which white is winning. In fact, winning a queen. So if you'd like to figure out why, pause the video. For the rest of you, I will give the answer immediately. Bishop to f6. Very strange looking move, because it hangs everything, but black can't take the bishop on h6 since the queen is pinned, and queen takes e4 allows rook d8 checkmate. Any other queen move on the e-file allows rook d8 checkmate. So the only thing black can do is, let's say, bishop to e6, hanging the queen on e7. So that was a very good variation for white. And after knight takes e5, if black had tried to play queen e7 a move earlier, getting the queen off of that c7 square, blocking the e-file so there's no revealed check, white has similarly attractive tactics, which start with knight takes c6. Again, the queen is pinned, and if queen takes e4, rook d8 is checkmate. So black has no option here but to retake the knight on c6. I guess, nope, black still can't move the queen anywhere on the e-file because that still allows rook to d8 checkmate. And after b takes c6, white has queen takes c6 with a fork of the king and the rook on a8, and black is toast. Oh, not to mention that the bishop is still attacking the rook on h8. So the only way for black to defend after playing bishop takes c5 and allowing knight takes e5 has to involve the move f5. But I found tactics there too that seemed to allow white to emerge with a less spectacular but still winning position. But Bruce didn't go down this line. After queen takes e4, he played f5 immediately, attacking the queen. Of course, I can't play queen takes e5 because knight takes e5 costs me a queen, so I stuck my queen on c4, defending the c5 pawn and stopping black from castling kingside. And here, for one move, I think black had a chance to slow white down and try to get back in the game. And to do that, he had to play the move g4. The white knight on f3 doesn't have any good squares right now. Knight takes e5, I think, just hangs material. Knight h4 is not possible, knight g5 is not possible, knight d4 is not possible. So the knight is moving backwards. And I couldn't find any sacrifice. I couldn't find a way to make the sacrifice knight takes e5 work. Knight takes e5 and let's say queen c3, putting a lot of pressure on this diagonal. I thought there'd just be bishop f6 and didn't see how to continue. But instead of g4, Bruce prepared queenside castling by playing bishop d7. And while that's the right idea, it is many moves too late. White has an obvious idea here. I guess obvious if you've been exposed to this kind of thing before. And that is to sacrifice an exchange on d7. Black's light-squared bishop is very important to the defense of the black king. It's guarding the f5 pawn and the e6 square, and it's the only minor piece with a reasonable chance of guarding f7. And I tried to calculate my way all the way through rook takes d7, but found that that my thoughts were constantly interrupted with the strategic idea that rook takes d7 has to be correct because it's the only reasonable thing white can do here and because the black king is so exposed and the white pieces are so active. So I played rook takes d7, and here black has to respond by taking that rook. There's nothing else to do that won't cause black to end up down a whole bunch of material. And he has to do so either with the queen or the king. Bruce chose the queen, so let's take a look at king takes d7 first, which I planned on responding to not with rook d1 check, but queen f7. The knight on g6 is under attack, the pawn on f5 is under attack. Rook d1 check is still threatened, and the bishop on e7 is pinned to the king, which means it can't grab the pawn on c5. And it kind of looked like the tactics should really favor white from here. For example, rook h to g8, guarding the knight on g6, allows me to either take this pawn on f5 with check immediately, or to play rook to d1 check when a king retreat to the back rank will cost the rook on g8. Rook a to g8 maybe is a little bit better, but still costs black that pawn on f5. Okay, Bruce played queen takes d7 instead, and here white has the move knight takes e5, which is strong for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it reveals the light squared bishop's access to h5, a square from which it attacks the black king on e8. And it forks the queen on d7 and the undefended knight on g6 at a time when the queen can't move to any square from which it defends the knight. So knight takes e5 is a very forcing move, which has to be responded to with knight takes e5. Going back a second, there was a... oh yeah, it wasn't here yet, sorry. So black has to play knight takes e5. I played bishop takes e5, and again this is a pretty forcing move because the rook on h8 is totally undefended. And Bruce made a mistake here but pointed out after the game that he could at least have played on from this position by castling queenside. And I think he's right about that. This is the best option for black, but it's still very good for white. Bishop takes h8, rook takes h8, rook to d1 comes with tempo, hitting the queen. And no matter where the black queen moves, the white queen will be able to invade either on e6 or f7. And white's up a pawn. Okay, instead, Bruce played rook f8. Maybe slightly better is rook h7, but I think that still gets black in trouble, because after queen g8 check, bishop f8, which is the idea, the queen from d7 guards h7, and the black king is temporarily protected. White still has bishop h5 check, winning at least an exchange. Instead, Bruce played rook to f8, but now bishop h5 check wins the game on the spot. If king to d8, rook d1 wins the queen. And rook f7 first would be worse than the loss of an additional rook, because after queen takes f7 check, king d8, queen g8 check, mate is forced. Bishop f8, queen e8, queen e8 checkmate. So in this position, after bishop h5 check, Bruce resigned. I was wrong about the length of the tournament. I thought it was 5 rounds, but it's only 4. And after that, I think that club will host its yearly championship. I'm going to miss qualifying for the championship by 1 game, but that's okay, because my work schedule is about to change anyway, and I'm going to be working second shift and will be unable to go to Fitchburg on Wednesdays anymore. But I've had a great time at the club and hope to come back at some point. I'll have 1 more game for you next week from Fitchburg, and other than that, I'll be limited to weekend tournaments. All right, thank you for watching.